And once again, here we are. No, if you're Penn State, you do not fire James Franklin. And the last time I checked, this season was far from over.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. My name is Zach Seyko. I am your host of the show. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. I'd really appreciate it if you left a like on this episode. More importantly, though, be a part of the conversation. You got a takeaway from Penn State versus Ohio State. I got a few of them here, and let's just jump right into it. The Fire Franklin chatter has resumed. It's on a national scale. National hosts are saying that Penn State should move on from James Franklin, and I am not ready to jump to that conclusion. I think that is an insane overreaction. May I remind everyone that Ohio State was the number 4 team in the country. They were projected, they still are projected to contend for the national championship. They were my preseason national championship pick, and I'm the Penn State podcast host here. So James Franklin losing to one of the best teams in the country. I know the record against Ohio State. I know the record against AP top 5 teams, top 10, top 25. It is hard to win against quality college football teams. There are only a few coaches that are able to do it presently, and not even that. I think a couple. Kalen DeBoer is 4-1. Everybody else struggles or has struggled against top caliber teams. What a shocker, right? But I understand that the frustration is warranted, because that is the game for Penn State, just like Michigan is the game for Ohio State, and the conversation is charged in that way. This is the same thing from Penn State's perspective. James Franklin, the perennial 10-2 teams, it gets tiresome. And I understand that, but you also can't say that James Franklin hasn't done a lot to put Penn State in a better position than what it could have been. And where it could be. So I'm not ready to sell out on everything just because there is another loss to an elite caliber team. Penn State wins the games that it's supposed to, and yes, it loses the games that it is supposed to as well. And I think this one stings a little more because there was the understanding that, hey, Penn State is there. Penn State is there. They're close, but obviously close doesn't matter, and I've already said that. Wins are wins and losses are losses in college football. That's the fact of the matter. So it doesn't matter that Penn State actually closed the gap on Ohio State, because that game in garbage time, they made it 20-12 a season ago, and now Penn State was right on the doorstep twice. They were inside the 5-yard line twice, and they couldn't convert. So I think that's what is more painful, is the fact that Penn State could have won this game, probably should have won this game, and didn't. And it just continues to stack the loss after loss after loss. However, the last time I checked here, everybody, is the season over? And I'm not trying to sound condescending in that way, but the season is not over because Penn State lost to Ohio State. And Abdul Carter, Kobe King have expressed that, hey, we could very well see this team again in the college football playoff, hypothetically. I won't go as far as the Big Ten championship because Indiana and Oregon are undefeated in conference play, and there's now obviously tiebreakers against Penn State. But the 12-team playoff changes everything. And sure, that benefits Penn State a lot. You know, it opens up the playing field quite a bit for more teams to get in. You don't have to get into that coveted 4-team playoff anymore. That was difficult. It was hard to do. And now it's, yes, easier, but I feel like if you get into the playoff, anything can happen. Where the conversation is going to change for me is if Penn State doesn't buck that trend of 10-2. If this team spirals. Now, granted, this final stretch of games, the 4 games, are not the toughest opponents. I am not afraid to admit that. Washington, I think, is good. I think they're starting to figure things out. That's a team that was built through the transfer portal, new head coach, right? That's not the national championship runner-up team. I get that, but they are beginning to peak. Minnesota could pose as a challenge, but Penn State is better than all of its opponents. Penn State should win the final 4 games that it plays, and we know that's what Penn State's good at. Penn State wins the games that it should. The final 4 games here on the schedule, they should win all of them. But we know from years past, if Penn State's going to learn anything from its decade of history decade plus under James Franklin, is that those teams, as talented as they are, even 2017, which was arguably the best team in James Franklin's tenure, was susceptible for that second ugly loss when they shouldn't have. Washington and Minnesota could be that threat, but I don't think this team does. I think it actually benefits Penn State that they have a whiteout, that they have the home game right after this Ohio State game to still kind of provide that energy, that juice for the season. Minnesota, I think Penn State matches up pretty well with Minnesota, and then obviously Purdue and Maryland, right? So the season's not over. Penn State finishes 11-1. Penn State hosts a college football playoff game, and this is what's so interesting to me, is because everybody is ready to just forget about the season for the most. Maybe I shouldn't say everybody, but for the most part, I've seen more than a significant amount of people just express that, okay, Penn State lost to Ohio State. When did the goals change? Because the understanding in the preseason, I said this team would go 10-2 and make the college football playoff. And then in the middle of the season, okay, hey, we know that they're better against USC, and they proved it. They beat them on the road. I don't know how many people in the preseason were picking Ohio State. I certainly wasn't one of them. And now here we are. So nothing has changed. The common expectation in the Penn State crowd here was that they were going to go 10-2, maybe 11-1. 12-0 was a possibility. That's clearly not the case anymore. But 10-2 to 11-1 was realistic. They can go 11-1. They can fit, and then the College Football Playoff Committee will reward them with a ranking within the 5 to 8 slot. They're going to be a top 8 team if they finish 11-1. When they finish 11-1, because they are better than those 4 teams that they still play. They will host a college football playoff game. If they win that college football playoff game at home in Beaver Stadium, which will be another whiteout game, is anybody really going to think about that Ohio State game in the regular season? Where the conversation will shift for me about James Franklin and the discourse, because I'm not ready to sell out on all of this. I saw an article the other day, or I saw an article yesterday. It is complicated to move on from James Franklin. It is. It is very complicated to move on from James Franklin because he has built the Penn State program up from what it was when he took it over after Bill O'Brien. Okay, there was a lot of work to get the facilities to now in this NIL battle, which Penn State is behind in. Right, James Franklin is responsible for the progress that was made in other areas. And I will go back to, what coach do you replace him with? I don't know what coach would come in and take over and give you immediately different results. Do you really want to take that risk? If you're Penn State and go after a smaller group of 5 coach, or is there somebody at the Power 4 level that you think can do this for Penn State? Kurt Cignetti and I guess over at Nebraska, Matt Rule are the only 2 candidates that really come to mind. I'm talking about available coaches. You can't just go and get whoever you want. Good luck getting Nick Saban out of retirement, Ed Orgeron, or whoever anybody wants to suggest. I do not want to see Urban Meyer. Do not put Urban Meyer in the comments section. Please. Please. But the season is not over. If they do spiral out of control, then it is the definition of insanity. That's when you have to start thinking about maybe a change is necessary. If this team misses the college football playoff, because this team is built to make the college football playoff and win a game or 2, and then what? If you get hot, then the conversation changes in a positive direction. If Penn State spirals, loses, misses the college football playoff, then come back to this episode and we'll revisit this conversation from a different point of view. Penn State lost to Ohio State for a reason. Ohio State's roster was more talented, but who's responsible in terms of the players, Drew Allar and who else, who bears the most responsibility from that loss to Ohio State? We'll talk about that next on the other side of this break. And today's show is brought to you by 5-Hour Energy. Our friends over at 5-Hour Energy know that being a passionate football fan is not just a hobby, it's a way of life, and it takes a lot of energy to power through all-day tailgates, touchdown celebrations, or agonizing overtimes, which is why they've created the Stand the Fan 5-Hour Energy Shot with a special flavor called Fan Fuel, the energy shot made just for super fans like all of us. The fans who are first in the parking lot, who are last to leave, we see you. Now, you know what gave me a bit of Penn State fan fuel this past weekend? Well, certainly not the result of Penn State, Ohio State, but that Zion Tracy pick six. Inside of the press box, Beaver Stadium was shaking. It was probably the loudest that I've ever heard it. That's what gave me fan fuel this past weekend. 5-Hour Energy knows that no matter what team you're rooting for, being a fan requires heart, soul, and a whole lot of energy. Whether you're prepping for a big tailgate, ironing your jersey, your game day to-do list is a mile long. That's why the limited edition Stand the Fan 5-Hour Energy Shot is here to help you stay fueled throughout the season. What's your fan fuel this week? Whatever it is, do it with a 5-Hour Energy, available on 5hourenergy.com and shipped nationwide. Drew Allar, the wide receivers, the offensive line. Who is more or less to blame for this loss to Ohio State? 20-13 on Saturday. Let's start with Drew Allar. He is the quarterback, and it's just evaluating the circled position groups here. So quarterback is going to be one of them. Drew Allar looked like the quarterback of old, of 2023. A little indecisive, unsure, kind of opted to run when you're the 5-star pro-style quarterback and you're dealing with a knee injury. I'm surprised that Drew Allar was as mobile as he was. So Penn State was not kidding. James Franklin was correct when he said, hey, Drew Allar's a lot better than we anticipated him to be with the injury that he sustained against Wisconsin. Okay, that's all well and good, but what matters here is wins and losses. So Drew Allar had a better game against Ohio State. It obviously was not good, and you saw old tendencies. I can't blame Drew Allar either. It is tough for Drew to. I think Drew did a lot of things well under circumstances. Protected the football. He had the one interception against Ohio State. That was not his fault. Trey Wallace has to hold on to that pass. I think where Allar was let down once again, because the same things actually affected this team, because it was eerily similar to me to not only the 2023 Ohio State game, but the 2023 Michigan game, where Penn State felt like they were there. They were at least there. They had a fighter's chance, but it was mostly, and then it turned into all Michigan. Kind of the same thing here. Penn State's there, Penn State's there, Penn State's there, but Ohio State was able to keep them at an arm's length distance and then eventually pull away. Drew Allar is good at protecting the football. I think that's one of his best traits, is actually his decision making. While he looked indecisive, it was because he didn't really have a lot of options to throw to. They were covered. The wide receivers were covered. The offensive line did not give him enough time. I do want to talk about Andy Kotelnicki in the upcoming segment, because Penn State made the offensive coordinator change. And what's the difference? 1 point? And the defense scored a touchdown. So Mike Yurcich's offense at least gave you 12 points on the road against the Buckeyes here. So what gives? Because the same problems were still there. The play calling, and I guess I don't want to get to Andy Kotelnicki just yet, but the wide receivers were not fixed. It was a Band-Aid. You moved on from Keandre Lambert-Smith and Dante Cephas and a Malik Mega, but he didn't really factor into the rotation all too much. But you made some changes, not wholesale, significant changes at wide receiver. when you probably should have. It's competitive. It's competitive. If you want an elite playmaker wide receiver, and frankly, there weren't that many available in the transfer portal, but for the ones that were, because I don't think Keandre Lambert-Smith, everyone's saying, oh, well, if they have kept Keandre Lambert-Smith and then had Julian Fleming, that probably would have been the difference. Maybe, hindsight's 2020, we don't know, but we've seen Keandre Lambert-Smith perform against Ohio State, against Michigan, and the results weren't there. I don't need to comment on what Auburn's dealing with. Keandre Lambert-Smith is having a good season relative to him. Auburn as a team is not. Let's focus on Penn State here. So you can make that speculation, but I think we've seen Keandre Lambert-Smith in that role against Ohio State and Michigan. It doesn't work. Julian Fleming was not the biggest. He was a step up in other categories because he's helped in the ground game, in a leadership role, other things that aren't going to show up in the box score that Keandre Lambert-Smith was not helping in. And frankly, the change in coordinator, these small changes that they made at wide receiver have helped them in games that probably they would have lost. USC, one of them. If you don't make that change to Andy, I don't know that a Mike Yurcich-led offense, the same offense from 2023, wins those other games. But when you're going up against an Ohio State secondary that has Caleb Downs and Lathan Ransom and Igbenison and Denzel Burke, all of those guys are future NFL starters, and some of those players will be selected in the first round. Penn State does not have that at wide receiver. Trey Wallace is the only, I guess, NFL caliber wide receiver to this point. Liam Clifford and Julian Fleming and the other guys that were out there on Saturday, because Caden Saunders is not available. But Penn State, in comparison, they have good wide receivers, but it's relative. When you compare them to Ohio State's defensive backs, they are not good enough. And that was the key matchup for me. One of them anyway. The other one was Penn State's offensive line against Ohio State's defensive line. The ground game for Penn State, non-existent. Penn State has struggled mightily in run blocking. And I know what James Franklin says about the offensive line. They're performing above expectations. But when push came to shove, literally, not even metaphorically at this point anymore, Ohio State's front six, I should say, because they run a 4-2-5 like Penn State, was the best that Penn State had seen all season. USC, Illinois, West Virginia, the rest of them, all the other comparable competition, right? The ones that could have surprised you and gave you a loss, the ones that actually challenged you, did not have good elite front sevens. Ohio State does. And Penn State's offensive line was overmatched. Now, I thought Drew Shelton did good for the most part against JT Tuimoloau. I thought that was going to be an absolute mismatch for JTT, and it wasn't. But when Penn State had to devote resources to helping Nolan Rucci, you don't have Anthony Donko as available as you want to, and then pressure. And that also plays hand in hand together. So the wide receivers are being blanketed in single coverage. Nobody's getting open. No one's making big plays except a couple of times Trey Wallace and then a couple other times Tyler Warren. Ohio State's defense had Penn State's passing game blanketed with the minimum amount of resources. And that's my point, is that the defensive backs were able to win in one-on-one coverage 9 times out of 10, and then that allowed Jim Knowles and Ohio State's defense to blitz and do more at the line of scrimmage, and then you had no run game to offset any of that. Ohio State's defense did not respect Penn State's run game. You actually look back at some of the film, and the linebackers wouldn't even move with the motion, the pre-snap misdirection, and everything that Andy Kotelnicki is known for. That's on the wide receivers first, and then the offensive line as well, because you don't do anything to kind of counteract that. You don't do anything to offset it, because then the play action doesn't open anything up, and the defensive backs just stay home for their coverage, their assignments. And that's what happened. And if you're Drew Allar, that interception should not have happened. That's just a miraculous play that goes in Ohio State's favor. Trey Wallace holds on to the football. It's a tie ball game. It's 20 because it's 20-13 at the end of the result. Trey Wallace holds on to that. it's 20-20. Penn State's able to punch it in the second time within the 5, or at least if it's hypothetically tied, then you can at least kick the field goal and not have to go for a last-ditch effort to go tie the game late in the fourth quarter. It's not Drew Allar's fault, and it's not even Andy Kotelnicki's fault either. The offense didn't execute enough, and I actually think Andy Kotelnicki and Tom Allen put Penn State in a position to win. Some people are blaming the coordinators. I don't. That's how we'll wrap up the show. That's how we'll wrap up this podcast. On the other side of this break, we'll talk about Andy Kotelnicki, Tom Allen, and Penn State's latest ranking in the AP Top 25. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet just $5 and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place, so when you get that hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, and it's all on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. And if we look over at FanDuel.com, we have the lines up for Penn State versus Washington, the whiteout game on Peacock, but Penn State is a 13.5-point favorite, minus 610 on the money line, with the total set at 45.5 for that primetime game on Peacock. If you like those lines, you can visit FanDuel.com today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Again, that is FanDuel.com. Look, at the end of the day, everybody bears responsibility. Penn State did not win against Ohio State, but it's hard for me to place a bulk of the blame on the shoulders of Andy Kotelnicki, especially Tom Allen. I mean, Tom Allen couldn't have done anything more. He held Ohio State to 20 points and even gave Penn State 7 points as well, with Zion Tracy's pick 6 and then the PAT as well. So Tom Allen did everything, put an excellent game plan together. But there was that drive where, that's why it reminded me of Michigan 2023, where Ohio State, when it came down to it, just needed to run the football. They were at the 2-yard line, shadow of their own goalpost, and just ran it the remainder of the way. And Penn State didn't have an answer when it was obvious. It was obvious, and Tom Allen's defense couldn't stop it. They couldn't get Penn State's offense the ball back. Andy, people want to argue, but let's talk about Andy Kotelnicki, because I think Tom Allen, up to that point, Penn State shouldn't have been in that situation defensively. Offensively, though, here is the difference, because it's a comparison. Well, Penn State only scored 6 points offensively, and is that really any better than a Mike Yurcich offense in 2023? And yes, it was, because the way that I remember the Mike Yurcich offenses from 2023 is that drives would stall out at midfield. It's not that, because when you look at Andy Kotelnicki in comparison with Ohio State in 2024, Penn State was driving down the field. There were opportunities to score, and they didn't. It was execution related. Whereas Mike Yurcich did not put you in a position to win. Andy Kotelnicki did. Andy Kotelnicki put this offense in positions to score, not once but twice, and then you have a miraculous interception by the Ohio State defensive back and an opportunity to punch it in inside the 5 and tie it in the fourth quarter, and they can't do that either. And I don't know what Andy Kotelnicki is supposed to do when Katron Allen and the offensive line cannot get enough push at the line of scrimmage to punch it in. I don't know what they want to do, what else he's supposed to do. Andy Kotelnicki can't run the football in for them. But that's the difference. So to say that, oh, what did Penn State actually gain here by bringing in Andy Kotelnicki? They've gained a lot. I do not, anybody that's saying fire Andy Kotelnicki is wrong, is flat out wrong. They're trying to stir up a conversation that is not needed, and it's not warranted whatsoever. Kotelnicki was not the problem on Saturday. Hindsight's 2020. Could he have called a better game? Sure. It wasn't perfect, but I would be incorrect if I did not say that he did enough. He called a good enough game for Penn State to beat Ohio State. The players, at the end of the day, did not execute. So yes, I would have had a play that gave Tyler Warren the ball under center, maybe out of shotgun or something like that. But I feel like with Katron Allen inside the 5-yard line, you should be able to punch the football in there. Venga Ioane comes in motion across the line of scrimmage. Ohio State defended that 4th down play, that 4th and goal play very well. They were ready for Tyler Warren in the flat. If you look at the replay, I can't remember the cornerback off or the defensive back off the top of my head, but Khalil Dinkins was contacted. There is an argument for there to be pass interference when Drew Allar went to Dinkins as just a last hope to try to get the football in the end zone. I don't know why. I personally, hindsight's 2020, I will preface that, and I'm not a college offensive coordinator for a reason. You kept getting closer to the goal line. I would have tried to run it again. And that's where a Tyler Warren shotgun quarterback sneak type of thing, right? Or bring in Bo Pribula. I think that's, if Andy Kotelnicki failed anywhere, I think Bo Pribula should have been more involved in this game plan, especially since Drew was not 100%. I'm glad that he was closer to 100%, but he was not 100%. It was not Andy Kotelnicki's fault entirely. Everybody bears responsibility for the game, but the bulk of it should not be on either of these coordinators. Let's finish with Penn State being ranked number 6 in the latest AP Top 25. At the end of the day, it does not matter. The College Football Playoff Top 25 will be released this week, will be released on Tuesday. And Penn State moving down a few spots, let us not forget they lost to the number 4 team in the country, and 1 point was the difference for that loss that Ohio State had going into this game. Penn State is a top 10 team, and I don't want people to forget that. That was the difference in this game. Ohio State has a top 5 offense and defense. Penn State has a top 10 offense and defense, and I will still sit here and make the argument that Penn State is actually in a situation to improve, to get better. These are two new offensive and defensive coordinators. Penn State is still getting used to itself as a team. There are other players in the transfer portal, and Penn State, while they are more of a veteran team, they're still actually relatively young. So I've said it before, I'll say it again. My expectations have not changed for this Penn State team. I expected them to lose to Ohio State. I expected them to host a home college football playoff game. And here we are. Those expectations still stand. One of my other expectations is that Penn State will continue to get better. They will continue to gel better. They will build more chemistry. The best days of this Penn State football team are still ahead. And they have a favorable schedule down the stretch, finish 11-1, and get into the college football playoff, and then see what happens. When you look at the actual rankings themselves, and I want to pull them up real quick, just so I have to do this off the top of my head and get these right. Oregon, Georgia, Ohio State, Miami's number 4, but Texas. Let's leave Miami out of that. Texas, those 4 teams are in that elite category. But then Miami, Penn State, Tennessee 7, Indiana's 8, BYU, Notre Dame at 9 and 10. Those are the teams that I think Penn State is comparable with and arguably better than. So the conversation's different when it's any of those first 4. But after that, Penn State gets into those games at a neutral site against those teams or a home playoff game, I'm confident that they would win. It's all about matchup, and I still think this team can get better, and especially if they get healthy. Remember, they were missing a fully healthy Denine Sutton, Anthony Donko, KJ Winston has been out. This team can and will get better. And that's how we'll end this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. I appreciate each and every one of you for checking out this episode. I'd really appreciate a like, but more importantly, please let me know your thoughts down in the comments section about anything we talked about today. Penn State men's basketball is starting its season. Penn State wrestling is right around the corner. So if you're not already, become an everydayer. Subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts for the latest conversations around all your favorite Penn State sports teams, not just football, but men's basketball, wrestling, and so much more here on Locked On Nittany Lions.